everybody, my name is EK, you're watching Ink Attack and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be talking about the Guildwars 2 graphics settings. Now I've been going through the Guildwars 2 subreddit quite a bit as of late, and I see a lot of people asking, especially new people, what are the proper Guildwars 2 settings, why is this game so badly optimized, why am I getting 20 FPS with a 1080 Ti or 2080 Ti or whatever. And it's always a bit of a pain to see that because there are so many settings you can change around to actually make your game run very nicely if you have a decent setup. And I want to just run you guys through that today. It's not going to be like a super in-depth review. It's not going to be focused on people who already know the game very well. It's going to be focused mainly on people who just don't really have the knowledge of this game and want to learn how to properly optimize their game. Now of course I can't represent every single situation in one video because I can't go everywhere at once, and of course I don't want to make this a 4-hour long video, so I'm just going to display a couple of different areas and we'll see what the impact of settings is and what exactly they do. So we have the settings up here, the display on here. We have the GPU percentage. This is how many percent of my GPU is being used. It's sitting at 30% right now. We are at very minimum settings. Now we also have memory here. This is how much RAM is being utilized. This is the CPU percentage, so how much of my CPU or how much of my processor is being used to run the game right now. I have made sure that I'm not running anything in the background apart of course from the recording software. For this one I'm using the GeForce Experience Shadowplay built-in option for NVIDIA video cards, which should have the least amount of impact on my performance, so we should get as clear a result as possible. And of course you have frame time, which just means how much time is there in between every frame for it to be loaded, which is very impactful. If this goes really high, you get like these delayed frames and everything just becomes really horribly looking, which is something that Guildwars 2 is sort of known for. To continue this rant, I'm running a GTX 1080 Ti OC Strix Edition. I do have it running at base clock speed right now. I do have it boosting of course, but that's just a factory boost and nothing added on top of that. In terms of processor, in terms of CPU, I'm running the Ryzen 2700X overclocked to 4.3 GHz on every single core, so there is a slight boost on that. I am very much aware that you are able to get a way better performing game running on an Intel chip at the moment, that is with the Ryzen 3 launch in mind. Currently Intel is simply better in single core speed, and since Guildwars 2 is very much a single core focused game, Intel will be a lot better. So keep in mind this will be a relative comparison. It will be looking at what the settings do individually and not necessarily about the raw FPS values, which is something you should always remember when looking at benchmarks, because pretty much no setup is exactly identical. One thing that's very important to mention before we dive into the actual settings is that I'm running the DirectX 12 mod. I do have a video specifically on that as well on my channel. I'll put a link in the description down below so you guys will be able to see what the performance improvement with that is like, and it's actually pretty good, so I highly recommend checking it out. Okay, so if you will excuse my horrible fashion walls you're seeing right here, it's actually terrible. I was just messing around with some dyes, so please don't offend me by telling me my fashion was horrible, because I know it's horrible. Let's start at the top. So we have display settings, windowed full screen, we have full screen, we have windowed mode. Honestly, I have run both windowed full screen and full screen for quite a bit. Yes, there is a small bump in performance, especially on low-end PCs with a full screen. But the thing is, I just love my alt-tabbing, which is just a lot harder when you're running full screen because it has to reload the entire game every single time. For you people who are unaware, what full screen does is it prioritizes the full screen application. It sort of turns off the background, sort of turns off your wallpaper and stuff, and it focuses all resources on the game itself. So especially if you have a bit of a low-end PC and some tasks running in the background may cause some more usage of other resources that your game would require, running it in full screen might give you a bit more FPS. For me, with this reasonably high-end system, with this undemanding game sort of, it doesn't really matter, but that's something to keep in mind if you have a lower end system. Moving further down the list, we have the refresh rate. Now we can't change this in windowed full screen. You can change this if you are in actual full screen. Just set it to your monitor's refresh rate and you should be fine. Here we also have a frame limiter. I could limit it at 30 FPS, I could limit it at 60 FPS or unlimited. Now my monitor has a 100 Hz refresh rate, so I want it to be unlimited so that we can get as many frames as possible. As you can see right now, we are sitting at 120 FPS, pretty much locked because we're looking at one single thing and nothing is changing. So this is just exactly the amount of frames that it can push right now. Moving below that is a bit more important. This is just to do with like 4K settings and stuff, 4K monitors. You don't really need to look into this unless you have a 4K monitor. I'm gonna skip it for now because I don't have a 4K monitor. So we have a settings preset here, which we can choose best performance, best appearance, or auto detect. Now auto detect, I don't think it really works that well. I've used it and it gives me settings that aren't very much optimal. I could max everything out with no problem usually. I just love how this guy is called Champion Fluffy, by the way. It's totally of a side tangent, but I just love it. Anyway, continuing. So yeah, best performance, that's this right now. This is giving me the best performance by turning every single thing to lowest, and best appearance will turn every single thing to its max. Now I do believe some settings will still not be at their very max, but that's, you know, not really important, because usually I highly recommend you change the settings individually. So here we go, guys. These are the more important settings. I'm like 5 minutes into the video and I haven't even talked about the settings, which is just standard for a video of mine. So let's go into animations. So use lower quality model animations and simulations to give better performance. Some changes, such as reduce close simulation, may require map change to activate. Wow, reading is hard today. So it's on low right now. I'm gonna bump it up to high, and you will see that it has no impact on the performance at all. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna map swap, and I'm gonna come back here and see what happens. Also very important to keep in mind, my GPU is at let's say 30, and this is at let's say 15. So I'm gonna show you once more. Low, doesn't really change, so 15 and 30, and high, nothing changes. So I'm going to do a map swap and I'll be right back. Alright, so we are back right now. You can see we are still sitting at 120 FPS. We are sitting at, well, even lower GPU usage right now, but I think that's just a coincidence. And my CPU usage is still around about 15. So animation has had no impact at all. Now it says advanced water animation. This might also mean that it has something to do with underwater. However, from my personal testing, I could not find a difference. So I'm not going to show it off specifically, because I just didn't find any difference at all when going underwater. It was still the exact same as being above water. So moving over to anti-aliasing. Now what is anti-aliasing? Here it says disable anti-aliasing may cause jagged edges. Of course, this is the setting. So we have Fps AA, we have SMAA, and we have SMAA high. Now, what exactly is anti-aliasing? Well, everything in the game is made up out of triangles, and these triangles will try and form shapes. Now, of course, if you put a lot of triangles together, you still will get rough edges, because triangles can never become circles. So what does anti-aliasing do? Well, it goes against aliasing, which is the ruggedness of every edge, and it will try and smooth them out. Now it will do this with graphical calculations, and these calculations take away from your GPU power. So this means that the higher you put this, the more it's going to impact your GPU performance. So let's just run through them. We're sitting at 30 GPU usage right now at 120 FPS with 8 ms of frame time. So we're going to go to Fps AA, and you can see it's going to bump up to, you know, 31, 32. It's bumping up a little bit, but it's keeping this consistent. You know why this is? Well, it's because my CPU is not being tasked anymore, and my GPU has all the headroom it needs. So as long as this one is not being pushed near 100%, this probably won't drop too much, unless my CPU is being tasked a bit more. Moving over from Fps AA, which is a very simple one. It says use fast approximate anti-aliasing, smooths edges of objects at a slight cost in performance. So this is sort of like, you know, it's looking at something and it's like, okay, well, I'm thinking the curves should be around about here, so I'm going to put them here, and it will probably make some sense. So it's not really calculated, it's just like a calculated guess, sort of. Now we have SMAA low, which is use low quality morphological anti-aliasing, removes jagged edges without losing detail and textures. Now this is a bit more of an advanced version of Fps AA. This is actually calculating some stuff. You can see we are still sitting at 120 FPS, and our GPU usage has bumped up by yet another %. Now I'm going to bump this up to SMAA high, and actually I have never really noticed any difference between high and low. Apparently we are bumping into 33% now, so I guess there is some sort of a difference, but it's very, very marginal once again. Alright, having covered anti-aliasing, let's go to environment. So low is controls the complexity of terrain, props, decals and ground cover. Higher values show more detail but require more GPU bandwidth. Some features may not update until the map changes. So this just changes the general environment around you. So let's go from low and let's just bump it up to high. And let's just see what happens. So immediately you can see it bumps up this to 33% from 32%. So the change is very minor here, but I'm gonna do a map change and we'll see what impact that has. Alright, so we're back. I have put this up to high, and you can see we are still sitting at around about 30 GPU usage. Now what often happens if you map swap and you return, your GPU usage will drop a little bit. This is very often the case when recording graphical stats, so don't get me wrong, this is probably still about 33%. See, it's slowly bumping up again. But as you can see, the difference between low and high is pretty much not there. If you have any decently capable GPU, let's say anything starting at the 900 series up to like the 1000 series or now the 2000 series, any one of those should really cover it, and any AMD graphics card that is comparable to those should also be fine. I'm not too familiar with their exact model names, but they should all be fine as well. Let's move over to the LOD distance. So what is LOD distance? Well, the distance at which rendered objects transition through varying levels of detail. So what a lot of games do is you have a sort of like a bubble around you, and within this bubble everything is being rendered at a high resolution. So let's say this object right here could be within my bubble. Now if I were to move away, let's say over here, this one might drop out of my bubble, and what will happen is it will start rendering this object at a lower resolution to make sure that we're not rendering anything that we can't see at close up anyway, because usually you don't really notice a lot of detail changes unless it's very close up, so it's just rendering everything around you. It's very similar if you're at all interested in VR. There's like this thing called, I think it's called 4-feet rendering, which just renders everything that's in your vision, and everything that's slightly out of your vision will be rendered at a lower resolution, which means that it will have more resources to render everything that's within your vision. So, LOD distance. I can bump up from low to medium to high to ultra. Now it doesn't say it requires a map change, so let's just assume that it doesn't. I'm just going to bump it up all the way to ultra and just going to see what happens. So pretty much nothing. You see? Pretty much nothing is happening. Once again, we are sitting at 31%, 32%, you know, pretty much no changes have occurred at all. FPS still 120, CPU usage hasn't changed at all, still sitting at around 15, and GPU usage at 30%. So, moving over, reflections, and this one, guys, is very important. Reflections, if I turn it up to terrain and sky, which is also why I'm at the water, this is pretty much what I wanted to show off. We have terrain and sky, so you can see it's a drastic change in how it looks. You can see if I go back, this is no reflections at all, this is just raw water, nothing is being reflected, there's no calculations being done, and when I put it up to, put it up to terrain and sky, it will just look at this rock, for example, and it will put it into the water. It will take some shadows, like from this thing, put it in the water. That's just reflection from the sky and reflection from the surrounding area. Now you can see, even though my FPS is still the same, the GPU usage has bumped up to 33 to 35%, and if I put it in none, this will be once again dropping to 30. So this is a decent impact. Now, of course, on my end, 3 or 4%. It doesn't look like a whole lot, but that's just because I'm running very much a high-end graphics card. It's very much possible that if you change this setting, this setting to terrain and sky on like a 700 series, like let's say a GTX 770 or something, this may be like a 20% boost in your usage. Like, take it with a grain of salt. These stats are just for comparative sake to see what exactly is being impacted with which settings. Don't take the actual values for the truth, because depending on your graphics card, your mileage may vary by quite a bit. Moving over from terrain and sky to all, and this is the big one, guys. This is the big one. You can see I'm bumped up from 33, 34% to 36, 37%. My CPU is also being tasked a little bit more. It's now at about 20%, and look at it, guys. It looks a lot better when I move it from textures low, I keep doing that. From reflections none to reflections all. Like, there's a huge difference. By the way, I'm playing on 30x40 by 1440. Not sure whether I've mentioned that, but I did want to quickly clarify that. Yes, clarify that. So this is one of the biggest ones. This is one of the biggest offenders. If you're having issues, especially near water, turn this down to none or turn this down to terrain and sky, because this is going to make a very big difference. Alright, so let's leave it all and let's move over to textures. Now, I'm assuming pretty much everyone knows what a texture is. A texture is just the way objects are being rendered. Every object is like a physical object in space, and there's like paintings put on top of the object on all sides, and these determine exactly how it looks, what it's showing, and of course how graphically intensive the object is. Now I do believe textures may require a map change. Let me see. Controls, textures, resolutions. Higher values give more detail on terrain and objects, but require more video memory and bandwidth. High settings not supported on 32-bit or OS or Mac. Now I'm assuming most of you run 64-bit OS, but this is something to keep in mind. So let's bump it up to medium. And you can see stuff around me will start changing. It takes a quick second to load up, but it will start changing around me, and once I bump it up from medium to high, once again you can see the ground around me changing. There's a bit of a lag spike right there. And you can see that the game actually starts to look sort of nice very slowly. You can see that there is a bit more detail on the ground. Let me just bump it down back to low. This looks horrible. This looks so incredibly bad. And if I bump it up, let's see, 30% textures right now. Sorry, 37. Let's just look at the ground, just see what the impact is of just the textures of the ground here. So 25% and 15%-ish, 10 to 15%-ish. And we're bumping up the textures from low to high. And bam, there you go guys, 30% just looking at the ground around me. Now if I move it over here, it will bump up towards the 40s slowly. So we are really taking a bit of a hit in the FPS. In the GPU usage, FPS is still doing very well, but you can see it's slowly dropping below 120. It does drop to like 115 sometimes, so it's taking a little bit of a hit. But once again, it's nothing too big, but it's a very noticeable change in the GPU usage. So here we go guys, we have render sampling. So right now I am at subsampling, which is also what makes this game look like complete crap right now. So render at a resolution smaller than that of this screen improves performance for lower end GPUs but results in blurrier visuals. If I boost this up to native, this is what the game should look like. The game is a lot crispier, a lot more high res, and it looks just a lot better in general. But you can see right now we are at 44% GPU usage. If I move it back down to subsample, we are at like mid-30s. So the difference is very noticeable. Now I don't recommend you change this from native to subsample unless you really have a lot of performance issues, simply because the fact that subsample just makes the game look horribly blurry, makes it look like complete crap, and well, probably want to smash my own head in if I had to play like that, because it just looks so damn bad. Now there's also the setting Super Sample, which is render at a higher resolution than the screen, increases quality, but can drastically affect performance for high-end graphic cards only. Now I'm going to change this, but you will see there is pretty much no difference at all in the quality. At least I can't see it. I can't see a difference. But at the same time, I also can't really see a difference in the GPU usage. So I'm not quite sure what exactly Super Sample is doing and how much it's boosting up my resolution, because if I were running this game at like 5K, let's say I'm running this game at 5K right now, it should be bumping up, but both the GPU usage isn't bumping up and the FPS isn't bumping down. So this setting looks really like useless. I oftentimes just have it on just because it doesn't do anything, and like I feel like in terms of like a placebo effect, it may give me a bit of a better look, and maybe sometimes, you know, that one pixel may look better, but I just don't know. I don't think it really does a whole lot. Okay, so moving on to one of the biggest offenders in the entirety of the game, we have shadows. So low means draw simple character shadows in addition to static map shadows. Now we can bump it up to none, which has no shadows at all. For this I'm gonna change the area because this area doesn't have a lot of shadows, so I can't really show off how it looks. I'm gonna be moving up towards here. Because around here there are a lot more shadows and it's really easy to show it off. By the way, the reason I'm not in expansion maps and I'm in these maps is not because I don't have expansion maps or because I don't want to test it there, but because the expansion maps are a lot more GPU intensive, so you will see way less change relatively between the settings because it's already being tasked quite heavily, and usually it's rather CPU bound. So this is a nice way to actually show off what kind of impact your GPU can have on the game, especially in the lower end areas, like the easier to run areas. So as you can see here guys, the area looks very nice. Even though I have no shadows on. So let me bump up the shadows from none to low. Well, not a lot changed. Actually, pretty much nothing. Let me bump it up to medium. Yeah, some stuff here changed, but still not a whole lot. You can see if I am at none, the GPU usage is 54. Of course, it depends on the area how much GPU usage you're going to have, so it's going to be a comparison between the specific settings in a specific area. Of course, every single area will have different values, so take everything with a grain of salt. Shadows, I'm going to bump it up all the way to Ultra, because Ultra will make it look great. Now, something is going wrong, because this is an Ultra. Something is most definitely going wrong, and that might have to do with shaders. So I'm going to turn up the shaders first. Maybe Ultra doesn't do a whole lot with the shaders, so it just bumps into the cable. So let's just skip shadows. I'm really sorry, I thought it would work, but apparently it doesn't. So let me just first cover shaders. So, controls the quality of shader effects, such as wind and lightning. Adjust lower to use, cheaper materials and fewer textures, which can improve performance for low-end GPUs. So once again, it's a GPU-bound setting. Now everyone thinks that Guildwars 2 is a CPU-bound game, and yes, it is true. In large Zerg content it is very much a CPU-bound game. But in these areas where you are alone, in these areas where you're like a party of 5 people, it is very much a GPU-bound game. But because most people have way above the required GPU for this game, you don't really notice it that much unless you're running a very low-end GPU. So let's bump it up from low to medium. Now this often happens where the game just, when you change shaders, I'm not quite sure why that is, but it like bugs out big time. But you can see a lot more shadows have been rendered here. We are still setting at, mid 50s, slowly rising to the high 50s, and about 20% CPU usage. But right now the FPS is 99, and with shaders at low, it was, above 100, so it's a decent impact, and this one is sitting at low 50s. This one hasn't really changed at all. Now the memory has slowly been bumping up. The reason I haven't been talking about memory too much is because memory is very much not important, because I can't imagine anyone playing on a PC with less than 8 gigabytes of RAM these days. Like, 4 is just such a low amount. I'm sitting at 32 myself, and that's not to brag, but it's just to say that RAM is cheap as fuck right now. So if you have less than 8 gigabytes of RAM, please just upgrade, because it's just required. You just need 8 gigabytes, preferably 16. So that's why I did include it, just so you guys can see it, but I don't really want to talk about it too much. So you can see there's a very big change if I change my shaders from none to medium. And once again, from medium to high, there will be a decent change, but it's a bit less. Now, you can see I'm sitting at 60% GPU usage, so from 50 to 55, from 55 to 60. CPU usage, while it's bumped up a little bit, it's still around about 20. Maybe it hasn't even bumped up a little bit, but once again, FPS has been dipping. It has gone from 105-ish to 100-ish to 90 to 95-ish. So I'm using the word ish a lot of times today, so, deal with it. We want to move on with the shadows now. We have covered them already, but they didn't work because we had shaders going on, so I'm going to put it back to none. You can see there's not really a lot of detail here. These are the shadows. The reason why I'm in this area is because these trees right here, especially this area over here with my mouse, if you can even see my mouse, like, it's probably very tiny on your screen. Neither Dolyak. The shadows are like very static. Now let's move to low. Nothing changes. Medium. Nothing changes. High. Not really much changes. And then we go to Ultra and bam! Bam! Huge change. Huge change. So my personal recommendation is either have them set to none or low. I don't really like none because in some areas shadows do disappear. This is just one simple example. So have them set to low or something. Or have them set to Ultra. Don't set them to medium or high. Yes, there are some changes, but the changes are so damn marginal. While there is a bit of a change in the GPU usage, just put them at Ultra or none or low. Because the only real difference is when you put them onto Ultra. And man, the game looks way better on Ultra, but of course it's very intensive on your system. You can see my GPU is starting to push really hard. It's sitting at around about 70% right now. We aren't even done with the game. The settings, I mean. Alright, so having covered that, let's move over to post-processing. Now, post-processing is one of those things a lot of people have some disagreements about. Some people say it looks horrible, and it's also very much dependent on the map. So I'm going to cover it, but it doesn't really impact the GPU or CPU usage at all. But I'm going to show it off. So we can move from none to low. And you can see it drastically changes the game, the way the game looks. It looks very much more bloom heavy, very much brighter, very much more saturated. And while in a lot of maps it looks very nice, in this map personally, I do kind of think that none looks pretty decent. Now we also have high. High just changes the setting a little bit more. It usually emphasizes it a bit more. In some maps, like this map for example, post-processing doesn't change a whole lot. Now what does post-processing do? Well, all it sort of does is, I'm gonna read this to you guys. So adds light rays, tinting and other effects for best appearance. So you have your standard graphic settings, and what it does is it sort of just puts a layer over it, and this layer will give you a bit more lighting, will give you a bit more saturation, will give you a bit more bloom. It doesn't really change the game a lot, but it just, you know, it puts like a filter on top of it. It's like you put on glasses, like tinted glasses, and the tinted glasses just change the way you view the world. That's pretty much what happens when you use post-processing. There's pretty much no change from what I can tell. Wait, actually, in this map there's a huge change. Oh, I was mistaken here. 60%, guys, 60%. Put post-processing to high. Wow, all those P's. I really hope my my plosives reduction is working properly. So we can go to high and BAM! That's 80%! I've actually learned something today. I always thought the impact was very, very small, but man, that's a huge impact. I've even told myself something, which is amazing. So these are most of the graphic settings that you can change here. Now there is a bit more down here. I'm going to skip these two. I will come back to these two, but these two aren't really easily shown off in this area. So we have Ambient Occlusion. You can see I'm going to swap between them a couple of times. Now what does Ambient Occlusion do is increase contrast and detail by applying Ambient Occlusion. Now it doesn't really say what it is. What it does is it adds shadows to objects in the area. So for example, if you look at the grass below me here, I'm just going to stand over here and zoom in. So you can see there's a bit of a shadow here. If I turn it off, shadow disappear. Turn on, disappear. Turn on, disappear. Like at the far end, you can also see the same thing happening with the trees. So the trees will get a bit more shadows, a bit more definition, a bit more contrast, because there's a bigger difference between the highs in terms of light and the lows, and the higher the difference is, the bigger the contrast is. So the better you can see detail. So that's Ambient Occlusion. Now the performance changes here, let's see, 65, 64%, 105 FPS. You can see CPU usage, by the way, hasn't really changed a whole lot. So let's move to Ambient Occlusion, and we are moving from mid-60s to high 60s, even into low 70s, so there is a decent change here. It's about 4-5%-ish. I do really like it. If you have the option to put it on, of course just turn it on, but it's not really required. It's a very subtle change, but it's most definitely noticeable. Now we have best texture filtering. Override the default texture filtering to use the best. This will just be sort of like an emphasized high texture model, so you can see some stuff changes. You might not even be able to see it properly with like the video, because of course it will be a bit lower res. But in the far end, like over there, you can see some stuff changes. So you can see my textures loaded a bit better, especially if you look over here, like at these shadows over here. You can see if I press it, like some stuff changes, some of the more distant textures will become better rendered. The difference here in performance, let's see, we are high 60s right now, maybe even going to the low 70s, and bumping it up puts me up to about 80. Now you can see even just zooming in has changed my GPU usage significantly, because I was over here. You can see it's bumping up to 80s just because I'm zooming out, it's rendering more objects, it's rendering more stuff, so it requires more GPU power. We're actually closing in on maxing out my GPU and actually plummeting my FPS down. So fortunately we are almost done. There is also depth blur, enables depth blurring effect for a stylized appearance on distant objects. Personally, I don't really like depth blur that much. You can see it on the trees especially, like if you look at this tree over here, like in the middle of the screen, if I activate depth blur, it will just start blurring the trees a bit, like it's there for pretty much every tree. This will just give it a stylized effect. It doesn't have any impact pretty much on your performance. Okay, so like I did mention, if you look at depth blur, there is a small change here. It bumps up about 3 FPS or so. So while there is a change, it's not really that noticeable. I do highly recommend, of course, turning it off. I don't think it adds anything to the game, at least not anything worth your performance. So if you really have like a super high-end system, let's say you have 2080 Ti, you know, turn it on if you want it. But in general, I just decided to turn it off because I feel like it's just wasting resources, especially in the expansion maps, which are a bit harder to run. So it's really just throwing away FPS in my opinion. Now we have effect LOD, limit detail of particle effects. What this does is it will just, when there are skill effects, it will make sure these skill effects are reduced a bit. It does impact FPS, I do believe. Unfortunately, I can't really test it that well because I can't really simulate a specific circumstance twice just to see it with both settings. I personally always recommend having it on because what it does is it makes it so that when you are in these big circle fights, you don't really get all the flashes. Like there's still flashing going on, but it like the screen, the visual noise is a bit reduced. So just turn it on, you know. I think I just said turn it off, but turn it on so that you can turn off some of the effects so your game can look a bit cleaner. Alright, so we also have high res character textures, enables high resolution textures for NPCs and other player character models, requires a map change to take effect. Now I'm gonna change this when we are also testing the character model limit and character model quality because it does sort of have impact on that. Alright, moving on to the next one on the list, we have light adaptation. Simulate the way your eyes adjust to light levels. Now, as you can see, when I turn this one on, the entire area around me becomes a bit less bright and the exit becomes a bit brighter. Now what happens here is it just simulates the way you are looking outside when you're looking through a cabin. So let's say in real life you're in a cave and you look outside, you know, the outside looks a bit brighter while the inside looks a bit darker because it's just way more light coming from outside. Now what happens if you do this, if you turn it on and you go outside, especially when it's super bright. Unfortunately I can't show it right now because, you know, it's dark and I really don't want to wait just with a single setting until it's bright, so really sorry guys. But what happens is your eyes will sort of start adjusting to it and it will slowly go from very bright and then it will go to you know, a bit more subtle, less bright, so it will really simulate the way your eyes would adapt to light in real life, which is very cool. I really loved the setting when I first started playing this game. So now we have vertical sync. Now vertical sync is just syncing your refresh rate of your game to your monitor's refresh rate. This means that when you activate this, you will be able to lock it at your monitor refresh rate. So let's say it's 70, you can just activate this and it will lock it at 70 FPS. Now you could also of course just lock it through a frame limiter. Problem is, however, if you have something that's not 16 or 30, you can't do it through here, so you would have to do it through vertical sync. It will do some more stuff, but this is pretty much the main thing I'm using it for. So that's pretty much everything in this entire menu. We also have motion blur power. I don't really like motion blur. I just keep it at like here. I don't really even notice it, but you know, I guess you can change it around. Doesn't impact performance at all. Same with light adaptation, doesn't change performance. This of course shouldn't change performance. So we pretty much have everything covered through the entire menu. Now we do have a couple of things remaining. We have character model limit, character model quality, and we of course let me just put on depth blur, I guess, and just you know, have everything maxed out. We also have high-res character texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the middle of Lion's Arch, because this is one of the most horrible areas to show this in terms of like the quality. So let's put both of this to lowest. So what this is doing is first of all, we have character model limit, controls the total number of character models that may be displayed. Nameplates will appear for all characters. So this means that it doesn't really load in a lot of characters. Like here there aren't too many people. Apparently right now it's not really busy. Let me instead go to the Mistlock Sanctuary where usually a lot more people are. And you can see this has some massive effects. So right now, if we look here, there's a decent amount of people. Still it's sort of empty right now. So if you look over here, you can see I'm sitting at, let's say, 100 FPS, which is pretty decent, right? We've got a couple of people standing there. Now let me bump up character model limit from lowest to low. Bam, there we go, mid-90s. Also keep an eye on GPU and CPU usage, so 60%, 25%, 60%, 25%. Doesn't really change a whole lot. You see, this one bumps down to like 20 sometimes, so maybe it changes a little bit with the CPU, but you know, that's pretty much it. Let me just bump it up to highest. There we go, guys. There we go, 30% right now and 70 FPS. So let me just rephrase that. 110 FPS, 115 FPS. And you can see 60 to 70 FPS. Now, why is it that when I activate this, my GPU usage is actually going up? I'll show you again. Oh, sorry, going down. See? 60%? 50%. Reason for that being, my CPU right now isn't pushing enough frames to task my GPU, because what happens is your CPU is just calculating frames and it's sending draw calls to your GPU. So it's saying, hey GPU, please create these frames for me. Apparently in this situation the CPU is sending frames at half the speed the GPU can render, which means that the GPU isn't being tasked very heavily. This also always suggests when your GPU isn't at 100%, your GPU will never be the bottleneck. It's very important to keep in mind, that's the way it works. So in this situation I would never have to upgrade my GPU. Now if we also bump up the model quality, so here we can start seeing these guys. For example, if I have it at lowest, everyone has standard character models. You can see everyone looks ugly as fuck, and you know, all I can see are the weapons, and I can see the backpacks I believe, but that's all I can see. Like I can't see anyone beside myself. Now bumping it up from lowest to low, you can see I can start seeing some people, let's say in my bubble. You know, once again, you remember my bubble analogy? Well, everyone within my bubble will start being rendered at a higher quality. Once again, 50 FPS, lowest, 70 FPS. And once again, my GPU is going down and down and down. Let's bump this up to highest as well. You can clearly see the difference isn't as huge, and this is mainly due to the fact that there aren't that many people around. The bigger the Zerg, the bigger the impact of this is. So if you are farming, let's say Istan, or you're farming a world boss, the impact of this will be massive, because maximum or highest will be rendering a very large amount of character models. In this situation there aren't that many character models, so the impact isn't that drastic. But you can still see, bumping it up from lowest, 70 FPS. With this at highest, and highest, bam, there we go, 50 FPS, and my GPU usage bumps into like 40s. Now you can see the frame time also goes up into like the mid 20s. My CPU usage still isn't that high, but that's okay. So now we have the last thing. This is high res character textures. Now this one does require a map change, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the Mistlock, back out of the Mistlock Sanctuary and then back into it. And we'll just see what this final setting has to do for our performance. Alright, so we are back. You can see the difference isn't as huge as some might have anticipated. I feel like we have dropped a couple of FPS. I don't have a comparison right now in front of me because it took quite a while to load back out of the map and back into the map for some reason. I think we are sitting on like mid 40s generally, and we may be a bit lower. The impact personally, as far as I can tell, is very low. You can see that my GPU usage once again is sitting in the 40s and my CPU usage is sitting in the 20s. Now, why do people say this game is very much CPU intensive? Is it because your CPU is being tasked very heavily? Not necessarily. So the graphics settings are done, by the way, guys. So these are all the graphics settings I'm going to be showing off. I'm just going to be talking a bit about what my personal experiences with these settings are and why people say what they say on the internet. So why do people say the game is very much CPU bound? Well, it's not because it tasks your CPU heavily. It's because it tasks your CPU's single core very heavily. So if I were to look at my individual CPU cores right now, I don't have the option to open it up right now. That's okay though. I can tell you my first CPU core will be sitting at about 100%. Now why is this? Well, the game is built on a very old engine. The game is built on the Guildwars 1 engine. It's been, changed a bit throughout the years, but it's built on the old Guildwars 1 engine from like 2000 and I don't know, 5 or something, maybe even early, maybe like 2000, somewhere around there, when it started development. So the engine is very old and it takes advantage of your single CPU core. So I have a 8-core 16-thread CPU. So why is my CPU that low? Well, it's because while my single core is being tasked very heavily, my other cores aren't being tasked pretty much at all. This is giving a very skewed image of what the game actually requires. Like, if this were a representation of my single core speed, this will be way higher. So that's why oftentimes you see people running these games with like very high-end CPUs like I am, and you see it's like 25% and you're like, wait, but it's not tasking the CPU very heavily. Well, it is, it's just not tasking the entire CPU very heavily. So Yes, the game is very much CPU bound, and if I had to give a recommendation for this game, if you only played Guild Wars 2, please do pick up a very high single core speed GPU. Something like a new Intel, like 8 or 9 gen would be very good. They overclock to well over 5 GHz, and they should give you very much a better performance than you're seeing from my end right now. Now also the Ryzen 3000 series has been announced today, and they supposedly will have a very nice single core speed as well, so it may be interesting to take a look at that as well. Anyway guys, I think I have covered pretty much everything there is to cover. Personally I think the game is reasonably optimized. People always complain about the optimization of this game, but you just have to really dive into the settings. Well, that's my inventory, that's not my settings. So you have to really dive in here, and you really have to change whatever you find to be very much dragging you down. Personally, just running through them very quickly. So we have animation, doesn't matter. Anti-Aliasing only matters when you have a low-end GPU. Environment, doesn't really matter too much, just keep it at high. Lod distance, same, doesn't really matter too much. Reflections, keep them at none on terrain unless you have a high-end system, because all just tasks your system very heavily depending on your area. Textures, keep them at high if you can, because otherwise the game looks like kind of crap. Render sampling, keep it at native. Subsample looks like crap. Super sample doesn't do anything as far as I can tell. Keep it at native, that's fine. Shadows, keep them at either none or low. I'll bump them up to ultra, high, medium, and even low to a certain extent. Doesn't do a whole lot. So just keep it at none and ultra pretty much. Shaders, keep them at high if you can. Looks way better. Does impact performance decently well, but I think it's really worth it if you can run it. Post-processing, apparently I've learned today that it actually impacts your performance quite a bit, so keep it at like low or high. Don't put it at medium unless you prefer the look. Personally I do like the post-process look, I do like the shininess, but that might be because I'm running an IPS panel which really makes bright colors look very good. So that's just, it's personal preference. The game runs a little better with post-processing off, but I don't think it's worth turning it off if you prefer the post-process look. Character model limit, personally I keep them at lowest. Sometimes I might bump it up to like medium if I'm in a dungeon. If I'm in a Zerg, I don't have to see other people's armors. I really like seeing other people's armors, but if I'm in a Zerg, I prefer my 60 FPS, and screw people with their armors. I'll just keep it at lowest. It's fine for me. But you can like keep it at medium or something if that works for you. Like, this is still very much playable. I'm sitting at solid 60 FPS, so that's okay. Here, Ambient Occlusion, turn it on if you can. Doesn't really matter too much. There's not that much difference, but it's worth it. This one, same, the best texture filtering. Depth blur, I don't like it. Effect LED, keep it on. It just removes some of the effects that you don't really need, like it removes massive overdose of effects on your screen. High-res character textures, same with these two. If you can run it, great. If you can't, it's not the biggest deal. Light adaptation, I like it. Fun gimmick, doesn't really change a whole lot apart from that. Vertical sync, up to you, and that's all there is to cover. So this was a very long video, guys. I've been meaning to make this one for quite a long time. I didn't expect this one to be that long. I was like, you know what, I can probably crank this out in like 10, maybe 15 minutes. I don't even want to know how long I've been recording this. Probably like well over half an hour of a video, but I wanted to make a complete guide for the graphical settings of Guild Wars 2. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask me. I'm very much interested in doing any follow-up videos if there is some, high demand for that, for some specific thing for me to cover. I know I've not given a lot of examples here, I know I've not covered a lot of areas here, but I've tried to give you as broad a perspective of what the settings do as possible, and I really hope this helps some of you guys. So please feel free to give me a like, subscribe to the channel, the whole blah blah blah. Let me know what you think of the video in the comments down below. Yes, I talk way too much. Yes, I'm very much aware of that, but I hope I helped you out by doing it. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Have a nice day, and I will see you around.